A single mom walks into a small-town bank, clutching her dream on paper only to be told, "No," loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. Humiliated and ready to give up, she turns to leave. But the woman beside her doesn't just offer comfort. She offers $10,000 on the spot. It seems like a miracle. Until whispers start. Whispers about powerful men in town with secrets they'll do anything to keep hidden. Suddenly, her new bakery is under attack, her reputation is on the line, and the quiet stranger who helped her may lose everything too. What happens when kindness threatens the people who control the town? And how far will they go to silence the truth? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn sun filtered through the bank's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor of Maple Harbor Bank. Naomi Rivera clutched her manila folder close to her chest, its edges worn from countless hours of preparation. The familiar scent of coffee from the waiting area did nothing to calm her nerves as she smoothed down her navy blazer, a lucky find from the local thrift store that still had its original department store tags. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, touching the small cross pendant at her neck. The weight of her dreams felt heavy in that folder. Detailed spreadsheets, carefully crafted projections, and a business plan she'd refined over countless late nights after putting her daughter to bed. The bank lobby hummed with quiet activity. A few familiar faces from church nodded in her direction, and Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop gave her an encouraging smile. Naomi managed a small wave, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "Ms. Rivera?" Calvin Drake's voice carried across the lobby, precisely measured and professional. "Please, come this way." Naomi rose, gripping her folder tightly. She noticed an older woman settling into the chair she'd just vacated, dressed simply, but with an air of quiet dignity about her. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman offered a gentle smile that somehow made Naomi stand a little straighter. Calvin's office was immaculate, with certificates lining the walls and a desk so organized it looked like a furniture showroom display. He gestured to the chair across from him, and Naomi sat, carefully arranging her papers. "Now then," Calvin said, folding his hands on his desk. "You're here about a small business loan application?" "Yes, sir." Naomi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm requesting a 7,500 microloan to launch Sunrise Loaves, a community bakery focused on artisanal bread, and—" "Interesting name," Calvin interrupted, his fingers already tapping at his keyboard. "Though, I have to wonder about the market demand for another bakery in Maple Harbor. Actually, we don't have any dedicated artisanal bread bakeries in town," Naomi explained, pulling out her market research. "I've been selling at the farmers market for 2 years, and my bread consistently sells out. I have letters from regular customers and—" Yes, Calvin nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on his screen. "But farmers market success doesn't always translate to sustainable business revenue. Tell me about your current employment." "I work as a home health aide, full-time for the past 5 years. I've managed to save 3-0 for the initial investment, and my credit score is—" "Single-income household, correct?" Calvin's question felt like a paper cut. Naomi's cheeks warmed. "Yes, but I've never missed a bill payment, and I've included my complete financial history in the application." Calvin began pulling up various screens, clicking through them with exaggerated concern. The ticking of his wall clock seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. "Ms. Rivera," he said finally, his voice taking on what she recognized as his sympathetic tone. "While your enthusiasm is admirable, our risk metrics indicate several concerning factors." The knot in Naomi's stomach tightened. "I understand the risks, Mr. Drake, but if you look at my projected profit margins—" "The current economic climate requires us to be especially prudent," Calvin continued, his voice rising slightly. A few heads turned in the lobby. "Your limited collateral, single-income status, and the inherent volatility of new food service businesses all present significant red flags. I've included letters of intent from local restaurants interested in wholesale partnerships," Naomi pressed, pulling out more documents with trembling hands. "And the church has already—" "Ms. Rivera." Calvin's tone turned patronizing. I'm afraid Maple Harbor Bank will have to deny your loan application at this time. He spoke loud enough that Mrs. Peterson, who was passing by outside his office, paused mid-step. Perhaps you might consider building more savings or finding a co-signer with more substantial assets. The suggestion hung in the air, like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Naomi felt heat creep up her neck as she became aware of the sideways glances from other bank customers. Her careful dreams of a warm, welcoming storefront began to crumble like day-old bread. I understand, she managed, though her throat felt tight. She began gathering her papers, trying to keep them from shaking loose as she stuffed them back into the folder. One market analysis sheet slipped free, floating to the floor. Before she could reach for it, Calvin had already snatched it up, holding it out with 2 fingers, like something slightly distasteful. "Best of luck with your future endeavors," he said, already turning back to his computer screen. Naomi stood, clutching her folder like a shield. The walk across the lobby felt endless, each step echoing against the marble floor. She could feel the weight of everyone's stares, some pitying, some curious, all unwelcome. As she passed the waiting area, she noticed the older woman from earlier was still there, watching the scene unfold with keen eyes. There was something in that steady gaze that made Naomi lift her chin slightly, refusing to let her tears fall until she was safely outside. She had almost reached the door when she heard the older woman clear her throat and say, in a clear, calm voice, "Mr. Drake, I believe I'd like to discuss something with you. Would you happen to have a meeting room available?" Naomi paused, her hand on the door handle, as Calvin's voice immediately shifted to its most accommodating tone. Of course, right this way." Naomi's hands trembled as she tried to stuff her rejection papers back into the folder. A few documents slipped free, scattering across the bank's marble floor like fallen leaves. She dropped to her knees, cheeks burning as she gathered them up, wishing she could disappear. "Let me help you with those." A gentle voice came from above. The older woman, who had been sitting nearby, knelt down beside her, gathering papers with careful hands. She wore simple clothes, a cream cardigan and navy slacks, but something about her carried an air of quiet authority. "Thank you," Naomi managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm Evelyn." The woman's smile reached her eyes, creating fine creases at the corners. "Would you join me for a moment? I noticed you mentioned a bakery." Naomi hesitated, clutching her folder. After the humiliation she'd just endured, the thought of discussing her failed dream with a stranger made her stomach twist. But there was something genuinely warm in Evelyn's expression that made her pause. "There's a conference room just there," Evelyn gestured to a glass-walled space. "Much more comfortable than standing here in the lobby." Before Naomi could respond, Evelyn had already turned to the young teller. "We'll be using the small conference room for a few minutes, if that's all right." The teller glanced nervously at Calvin's office before nodding. "Of course, Mrs. Hart." The conference room was quiet, a welcome shelter from the busy lobby. Evelyn pulled out a chair for Naomi before settling across from her. "Now then, tell me about this bakery of yours." Naomi took a deep breath, smoothing her folder on the table. "It's called Sunrise Loaves. I've been baking all my life, learned from my grandmother. People always said I should sell my bread, but—" She shook her head. "Maybe Mr. Drake was right. It's just a dream." "Dreams are where every successful business begins," Evelyn said firmly. "May I?" She gestured to the business plan peeking out from the folder. Naomi nodded, sliding it across. She watched as Evelyn studied each page with careful attention, noting the neat columns of numbers and projected costs. "Very thorough," Evelyn murmured. "You've done your homework." She looked up, meeting Naomi's eyes. "You know, years ago, I walked into a bank much like this one. I had a solid business plan, excellent credit, and more determination than sense. They still showed me the door. What happened? Someone took a chance on me." Evelyn reached into her handbag and withdrew a checkbook. "Sometimes all we need is one person who sees what others miss." Naomi's eyes widened as Evelyn began writing. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." $10,000, Evelyn said calmly. sliding the check across the table. "Not a gift, a partnership. You'll pay it back when you can, no interest, no pressure. Just two women helping each other succeed." Naomi stared at the check, her vision blurring. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because I've been where you are, and because this plan deserves a chance." Evelyn pulled a simple notebook from her bag. "We'll write up a basic agreement, both sign it. Nothing fancy. Just honest intentions between partners." With trembling fingers, Naomi picked up the pen Evelyn offered. Together, they drafted a straightforward document stating the terms 10, 0 loan, 0 interest, repayment timeline flexible, based on the business's success. "I don't know what to say," Naomi whispered as they both signed. "Say you'll make the best bread in Maple Harbor." Evelyn's eyes twinkled. "And that you'll remember to help someone else someday when you're able." Through the glass walls, Naomi caught sight of Calvin Drake watching them, his jaw tight. He quickly looked away when Evelyn met his gaze. Standing up, Evelyn carefully folded their agreement and handed it to Naomi. "Keep this safe, and keep believing in your dream." They walked together through the lobby, past curious onlookers who had witnessed Naomi's earlier rejection. Outside, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the nearby lake. Naomi touched her bag where the check rested safely inside, hardly daring to believe this was real. A horn honked in the distance. A flock of geese called overhead. Life continued as normal in Maple Harbor, but for Naomi, everything had changed in the span of an hour. She drew in a deep breath of the cool air, tasting possibility on her tongue. The autumn sun was dipping behind the apartment complex when Evelyn's sensible sedan pulled into the visitor parking spot. Naomi watched from her second-floor window, smoothing her shirt and taking a deep breath. The morning's events still felt like a dream. "Someone's here!" Maya called out, pressing her face against the window screen. Her dark curls bounced as she raced to the door, clutching one of her handmade cards. "Wait for me, sweetie," Naomi said, catching up just as Maya reached for the doorknob. "Remember what we talked about with strangers?" "But she's the nice lady from the bank who helped you," Maya protested, bouncing on her toes. "I saw her from the window." A gentle knock made them both jump. Naomi opened the door, to find Evelyn standing there with a warm smile, holding a small potted plant. "I hope I'm not too early," Evelyn said, then noticed Maya peeking around her mother's leg. "And who might this be?" Maya stepped forward, holding out one of her cards. It was decorated with careful crayon drawings of hearts and stars. "I'm Maya. I make courage cards for people who need happy thoughts." "What a beautiful gift," Evelyn said, accepting the card with both hands. She read aloud, "Be strong and take heart." "Is that from the Bible?" Maya nodded eagerly. "Psalm 27. Mommy helps me pick verses." "Please, come in," Naomi said, ushering Evelyn inside. The apartment was small but tidy, with worn but clean furniture and cheerful yellow curtains Maya had helped pick out. "I'm sorry, it's a bit cramped." "It's lovely," Evelyn said, genuine warmth in her voice. She placed the plant on a side table. "Peace lily. They're hardy and good at cleaning the air." The kitchen was barely big enough for two people, but Naomi had already prepared her workspace. Fresh ingredients lined the counter: flour, honey, wheat germ, and yeast. The mixing bowl waited ready. "Would you like to see how I make the honey wheat bread?" Naomi asked, tying on her apron. "It's our most popular recipe at the church potlucks." "I'd love to," Evelyn said, settling onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. Maya pulled up her special stool, eager to watch too. Naomi moved with practiced grace in the small space, measuring ingredients with precision but without fuss. "The secret is in the timing," she explained, combining the warm water and yeast. "And using local honey, it makes all the difference." As she worked, kneading the dough with strong, sure movements, Naomi shared stories about learning to bake from her grandmother, about the comfort food had brought to her grieving neighbors, about her dream of making the bakery a place of both sustenance and spirit. the kitchen filled with peaceful quiet, broken only by Maya's occasional humming and the soft sounds of dough being worked. When Naomi finally placed the loaf in the oven, Evelyn leaned forward. "While that bakes, let's talk about getting your bread in front of more people," she said. "Have you considered doing a tasting event?" Naomi wiped her hands on her apron. "I've thought about it, but the logistics—" "I might be able to help with that." Evelyn pulled out her phone. "Do you know Ruthie James from your church?" "The deaconess?" "Of course, she's always so supportive of new ideas." Evelyn dialed, putting the phone on speaker. Ruthie's warm voice filled the kitchen. "Evelyn Hart, what brings you calling today?" "Ruthie, I'm sitting in Naomi Rivera's kitchen, watching her bake the most wonderful bread. How would you feel about hosting a tasting event in the fellowship hall this Saturday?" "Naomi's bread? Child, you know that's a yes. That woman's honey wheat could make angels weep." Ruthie's enthusiasm made Maya giggle. "We can set up after the morning prayer group. What do you need from me?" They worked out the details: times, tables, permits needed for food service. Ruthie knew exactly which forms would be required and promised to have them ready the next day. "You'll need sample sizes," Evelyn said after they hung up. "And a way to take orders. Have you thought about packaging?" Just then, the timer chimed. Naomi pulled the golden loaf from the oven, its aroma filling the small apartment with warmth and promise. She set it on the cooling rack, unable to keep from smiling at its perfect rise. "First, let's taste," Evelyn said, eyes twinkling. "Business plans can wait a moment." When the bread was cool enough, Naomi sliced it carefully. Steam rose from each piece, carrying the sweet scent of honey and wheat. Maya brought butter from the fridge, and they all sat at the small kitchen table. Evelyn took a bite and closed her eyes. This is extraordinary, Naomi. The texture, the balance of flavors." She took another bite. "This isn't just bread. This is comfort and care in every slice." "That's what Mommy says," Maya declared, already reaching for seconds. "That love is the secret ingredient." Later that night, after Maya was tucked in bed and Evelyn had gone home with promises to help plan the tasting, Naomi stood in her quiet kitchen. The counter was dusted with flour, bowls stacked neatly in the dish drain. She pulled out more ingredients, beginning the slow process of preparing dough for Saturday's samples. The familiar motions brought peace: measuring, mixing, kneading. Each batch would need to rest overnight, rising slowly in the cool darkness. As she worked, Naomi hummed old hymns, her heart full of cautious hope. The kitchen filled with the yeasty smell of possibility, of dreams beginning to rise. The fellowship hall hummed with activity as Naomi arranged the last basket of golden brown loaves on the checkered tablecloth. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the steam that rose from the still warm bread. Maya skipped between the tables, placing her carefully drawn courage cards next to each basket. "Mama, can I put cinnamon sugar on the samples?" Maya asked, her ponytail bouncing as she moved. Naomi smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "They're perfect, just as they are, sweetheart. Remember what we said about letting the bread speak for itself?" The double doors swung open as more townspeople filtered in, filling the room with cheerful chatter. Evelyn stood near the entrance, greeting people with warm handshakes and directing them toward the tasting tables. "Everything looks wonderful," Evelyn said, approaching Naomi's station. "How are you feeling?" Naomi took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. "Nervous, excited, grateful, all of it at once." Ruthie James, wearing her Sunday best despite it being Saturday, made her way through the crowd with her grandson Jamie's hand tucked in hers. Behind them walked a tall man in an expensive suit, Chuck Langley, whose name appeared on half the buildings in town. "Naomi," Ruthie called out, her voice carrying that natural authority she'd earned from years as a church deaconess. "I want you to meet someone special. This is Mr. Chuck Langley. He's one of our most generous supporters." Chuck extended his hand, his smile practiced and pristine. "Pleasure to meet you. Ruthie tells me you're quite the baker." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Langley." Naomi offered him a sample of her signature honey wheat. "I hope you'll try some." Jamie tugged at his grandmother's sleeve. Can I have bread too, Grandma? Of course, baby. Ruthie lifted him up so he could see the display better. Naomi handed Jamie a warm piece of bread, watching his face light up at the first bite. The 6-year-old looked between Chuck and his grandmother, then reached out and tugged gently on Chuck's sleeve. The words that followed dropped into the room like stones into still water. "Mommy says you're my daddy," Jamie said, his voice clear and innocent. The fellowship hall fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Ruthie's face drained of color, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Chuck's polished demeanor cracked for just a moment before he recovered, forcing a laugh that rang hollow in the quiet room. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they?" He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying. "Speaking of children, I'd like to announce a donation to the church's youth program. $20,000 for new playground equipment." People shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Chuck and Ruthie. Whispers started at the edges of the room, spreading like ripples. "Did you hear what that boy said? Isn't that Ruthie's grandson? Didn't she used to work for?" Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she continued cutting samples, trying to focus on the task in front of her. She could feel the tension in the air, thick as bread dough. Maya looked up at her mother, confusion clear on her face. "Keep handing out your courage cards, sweetie," Naomi whispered, giving her daughter a reassuring smile. Ruthie had stepped back from the table, one hand on Jamie's shoulder, her expression unreadable. Chuck had already moved to the other side of the room, surrounded by church board members discussing his donation. The tasting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. People still came for samples, praising the bread's texture and flavor, but their eyes kept darting to where Ruthie stood or where Chuck held court. Despite the awkward undercurrent, Naomi's baskets emptied quickly. Her rosemary sourdough sold out first, followed by the cinnamon raisin. People asked about prices and opening dates, some even trying to place advance orders. "You've got a gift," one elderly woman said, pressing a $5 bill into Naomi's hand. "We need something like this in Maple Harbor." As the crowd thinned, Naomi noticed Calvin Drake had slipped in at some point. He stood near the door with Chuck, their heads bent close in conversation. Evelyn observed them from across the room, her keen eyes missing nothing. Naomi focused on packing up her empty baskets, her heart full despite the strange tension that lingered in the air. She'd sold every loaf she'd brought, over 50 in total. People wanted her bread. They believed in her dream. Maya helped gather the remaining courage cards, some of which had been pinned to the bulletin board by appreciative readers. "Mama, can we do this again next week?" "We'll see, sweetheart." Naomi hugged her daughter close, grateful for her simple enthusiasm. "First, we need to find our own space." The fellowship hall gradually emptied, leaving behind the lingering scent of fresh bread and the echo of what had been said and what hadn't. Chuck and Calvin had already departed, but their loaded glance hadn't escaped Evelyn's notice. She helped Naomi pack the last of her supplies, her movements deliberate and thoughtful. The autumn evening wrapped around Naomi's modest apartment building like a worn quilt. Inside, the small dining room table barely fit 4 people, but somehow that made the gathering feel even more special. Steam rose from bowls of homemade vegetable soup, and the fresh bread they'd saved from yesterday's tasting sat in the center, already half-eaten. "And then this nice lady said she'd drive all the way from Millbrook just to buy more," Maya announced, practically bouncing in her chair. Her dark curls danced with each excited movement. "That's like super far, right, Mom?" Naomi smiled, reaching over to tuck a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. "That's 40 minutes away, sweet pea." "The word spreads fast when something's worth the journey," Evelyn said, breaking off another piece of bread. She wore a simple cardigan and looked completely at home in their small space. "And your mother's bread is definitely worth the journey." Ruthie nodded in agreement, but seemed distracted, stirring her soup more than eating it. The usually forthright deaconess had been quiet all evening, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Maya, honey," Naomi said, noticing Ruthie's unease, "why don't you show Miss Evelyn your new drawings in your room, the ones you're making for the bakery?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, I made this really cool sign with sunshine and everything. She jumped up from her chair and tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. "Come see." Once Maya had led Evelyn down the short hallway, Ruthie set down her spoon and leaned forward. "Naomi, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Naomi's stomach tightened. She'd been wondering when this conversation would come. "About what Jamie said?" Ruthie nodded, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. "I know you must have questions, but I'm asking you, as a friend, and as someone who understands what it means to protect family, please don't repeat what Jamie said, to anyone." The weight in Ruthie's voice made Naomi reach across the table and cover the older woman's clasped hands with her own. "Of course, Ruthie. It's not my story to tell." Ruthie's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained troubled. "Chuck, Mr. Langley. He's never publicly acknowledged Jamie. But he's always kept quiet support in the shadows. Christmas presents that come anonymously, a college fund I'm not supposed to know about." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "It's complicated." "I understand complicated," Naomi said softly, thinking of her own journey as a single mother. "Jamie's mother, my daughter Sarah, she passed away when he was just 2. Chuck, Ruthie's voice caught. "He makes sure we're taken care of, in his way. But it has to stay in the shadows. That's just how it is." Naomi squeezed Ruthie's hands. "Your secret is safe with me. I promise." They could hear Maya's excited voice carrying from down the hall, explaining her artistic choices to Evelyn. The familiar sound helped ease the tension in the room. "Thank you," Ruthie said, wiping quickly at her eyes. "You're good people, Naomi Rivera. Don't let anyone in this town tell you different." When Evelyn and Maya returned, Maya clutching several drawings she insisted on giving to Evelyn, the conversation shifted back to lighter topics. They finished their meal with slices of apple that Maya had carefully arranged in the shape of flowers on their plates. After their guests left, Naomi started cleaning up while Maya worked on homework at the kitchen counter. The familiar rhythm of washing dishes and answering occasional math questions felt comforting after the evening's heavy conversation. "Mom, can I put up my drawings in the bakery window when we open?" Maya asked, erasing something in her workbook. "Of course, baby, that'll be the first thing we do." Naomi smiled, but then remembered she hadn't checked the mail. "Speaking of the bakery, let me grab the mail real quick. Keep working on that math." She slipped her keys from her purse and headed down to the building's lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she turned her key in the mailbox. Among the usual bills and flyers was an official-looking envelope from the city. Back in the apartment, Naomi settled onto the couch to read through the mail while Maya finished her homework. Her heart skipped when she saw the city's seal on the letter. Opening it carefully, she pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Application denied, zoning variance required." The words seemed to pulse on the page. Below them was a paragraph of technical language about commercial food preparation requirements and zoning restrictions she hadn't known existed. The warmth of the evening, of sharing soup with friends, of Maya's proud smile, of Ruthie's trust, began to fade. Naomi sat very still on the couch, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. The small apartment suddenly felt colder, despite the lingering sense of soup and bread. "Mom," Maya called from the kitchen. "Is 7 times 8 56?" Naomi took a deep breath, carefully folding the notice and setting it aside. "That's right, sweet pea. Good job." She remained on the couch, staring at the folded paper on the coffee table. The weekend's joy seemed to be slipping away like water through her fingers, leaving behind only questions and an unsettling sense of unease. The Monday morning crowd at the daily grind shuffled in and out, their coffee cups steaming in the cool air. Naomi sat across from Evelyn at a corner table, spreading out 3 different rental listings she'd circled in the local paper. Her hands still smelled like the cinnamon rolls she'd baked at dawn, trying to settle her nerves. "This one's closest to the church," Naomi said, pointing to a listing, "but it's the most expensive." Evelyn studied each option carefully, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She took a thoughtful sip of her chamomile tea before responding. "Location matters, but so does having enough left over for equipment. Show me the one you keep looking at." Naomi slid forward a wrinkled listing she'd folded and unfolded dozens of times. It's the smallest, but it's right on Main Street, next to the bookstore. Her voice softened. I can almost see it already. The display window with fresh loaves, maybe some cafe tables outside in summer. Sometimes the smallest spaces hold the biggest dreams, Evelyn said, examining the details. And the rent's reasonable. But this zoning notice concerns me. She placed the official letter on the table between them. I've seen this before. It's a tactic. A tactic? Naomi's brow furrowed. When certain people want to make things difficult, they often use zoning regulations as their weapon of choice. Evelyn's voice remained calm, but her eyes held a knowing look. But regulations can be challenged, especially when they're being selectively enforced. At the counter nearby, a tall man in work boots and a flannel shirt turned slightly at their conversation. Naomi recognized him as Alex Mercer, who'd done some repair work at the church last month. The space will need work, Evelyn continued. Shelving, counter space, proper ventilation. Excuse me, Alex said, stepping closer to their table. His voice was quiet but confident. I couldn't help overhearing. I do custom carpentry work, and I'd be happy to help with the shelving at cost. He shifted his coffee cup to his left hand. The town could use a real bakery. Naomi hesitated, her instant reaction to decline assistance wrestling with practical need. That's very kind, but Alex does excellent work, Evelyn interjected. He rebuilt the church's communion rail last spring. Alex smiled slightly. Just trying to put my skills to good use. No pressure. But if you'd like to see some samples of my work, I can bring my portfolio by whenever you're ready. Naomi looked at the rental listing again, mentally calculating. At cost, proper shelving might actually be possible. Maybe, could you show me some examples first? Of course. Alex pulled out a business card with his contact information. Just let me know when. And congratulations on the bakery. That bread at the church tasting was something special. After Alex returned to the counter, Evelyn leaned forward. Sometimes help isn't charity, Naomi. It's community. Naomi nodded slowly, tucking the card into her purse. I know, it's just after yesterday's letter. Which is precisely why we press forward, Evelyn said firmly. I'll help you learn QuickBooks. It's easier than it looks. And I have contacts with some reliable suppliers from my restaurant investments. You invested in restaurants? Among other things, Evelyn waved off the question with characteristic modesty. The point is, we'll get you set up properly. Would you like to look at the space today? An hour later, they stood inside the empty storefront. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, dust motes dancing in the air. The space was small, but its potential felt enormous. Naomi walked the perimeter, measuring with her steps, already planning where everything would go. The health department will want washable surfaces, Evelyn noted, running a hand along the counter. And we'll need to check the electrical for the ovens. We? Naomi turned to her new mentor. Partners, remember? Evelyn smiled. Though you're still in the driver's seat. They spent the next hour discussing layout options and requirements. Naomi took notes in her small notebook, her handwriting growing more excited with each page. The space wasn't perfect, but it felt right, like finding the exact ingredient a recipe needed. Afterward, they walked home together, through streets lined with maple trees. Red and gold leaves drifted down around them, crunching beneath their feet. I've been thinking about that psalm you quoted at dinner last night, Naomi said. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart. Psalm 27. Evelyn nodded. One of my favorites. When John passed away, that verse helped me keep going. And now. Naomi paused, watching a leaf spiral down. It feels like waiting and moving forward at the same time. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Evelyn touched her arm gently. Faith isn't just about waiting passively. It's about taking the next right step, even when the path isn't clear. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, leaves continuing their autumn dance around them. I'll call Alex, Naomi decided. About the shelves. And I want to learn QuickBooks, even though computers make me nervous. One step at a time, Evelyn assured her. We'll start with the lease tomorrow. I know a good lawyer who can review it. Naomi started to protest, but Evelyn held up a hand. At cost, she said with a smile, just like the shelves. The afternoon sun streamed through Naomi's small kitchen window, casting warm light across her flour-dusted counter. The scent of cinnamon and butter filled every corner of the apartment. Maya sat at their tiny kitchen table, doing homework, and occasionally sneaking bits of frosting when she thought her mother wasn't looking. Naomi carefully pulled another tray of golden-brown cinnamon rolls from the oven. These were her third batch today, each one slightly different as she tweaked her grandmother's recipe. The first batch had been too sweet, the second needed more cinnamon, but these looked perfect. What do you think about these, sweetheart? Naomi asked, setting the hot pan on a cooling rack. I added a little extra vanilla to the dough. Maya looked up from her math worksheet, her eyes brightening. Can I be your official taste tester? A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron, leaving floury handprints. She wasn't expecting anyone, and Evelyn usually called first. Through the peephole, she saw a young man in khakis and a button-down shirt, holding a leather messenger bag. He didn't look like a salesman, but she kept the chain lock fastened as she opened the door. Mrs. Rivera? He asked, offering a friendly smile. I'm Daniel Matthews from the Harbor County Chronicle. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Naomi's heart skipped a beat. A reporter? She glanced back at Maya, who was watching curiously from the kitchen doorway. What is this about? Naomi asked through the narrow opening. Daniel pulled out a business card. I'm working on a story about women entrepreneurs in small towns, specifically the challenges they face securing business loans. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. I heard about what happened at Maple Harbor Bank last week. Naomi studied his card. The newspaper was legitimate, 12. She recognized it as the bigger regional paper that covered several counties. Maya, honey, she called over her shoulder, why don't you take your homework to your room for a bit? Once Maya had gone, Naomi closed the door, removed the chain, and reopened it. Please come in, Mr. Matthews. Daniel, please, he said, stepping into the small living room. The smell of cinnamon immediately made him smile. Something smells amazing. I'm testing recipes, Naomi explained, leading him to the couch. She sat in the armchair across from him, smoothing her apron nervously. How did you hear about the loan situation? Daniel pulled out a small notebook. Small towns talk. But more importantly, someone contacted our tip line about some concerning patterns at Maple Harbor Bank. Your case was mentioned specifically. He leaned forward slightly. Would you be willing to tell me about your experience with Mr. Drake? Naomi twisted the edge of her apron. I'm not sure I should. Everything can be off the record for now, Daniel assured her. I'm just gathering information at this point, but Mrs. Rivera, if there's systematic discrimination happening in local lending, people should know about it. Something in his earnest tone made Naomi pause. She thought about other women like her, single mothers with dreams and skills but limited resources. How many had Calvin Drake turned away with his careful words about risk factors? Off the record? She confirmed. Daniel nodded, clicking his pen. Over the next hour, Naomi shared everything. Her careful preparation of the business plan, the public humiliation of the denial, Evelyn's unexpected intervention. Daniel took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. There's something else, he said, flipping to a new page. I heard about an interesting moment at the church fellowship hall this weekend. Something involving Chuck Langley? Naomi's throat tightened. I really can't discuss that. Of course, Daniel said smoothly, though she could see his reporter's instinct had been triggered by her reaction. But hypothetically speaking, if someone like Chuck Langley was involved in suppressing certain personal information while simultaneously having influence over local business matters, he left the implication hanging. Mr. Matthews, Daniel, Naomi said firmly. That situation involves a child. I won't be part of exposing family matters in the newspaper. Daniel nodded, respect showing in his eyes. Fair enough. But the loan denial and the sudden zoning issues, that's different, isn't it? That's about fair access to opportunity. A timer dinged in the kitchen. "Excuse me," Naomi said, rising to check her cinnamon rolls. When she returned, Daniel was standing, tucking his notebook away. "Just one more question," he said. "Would you be willing to share copies of your loan application and the denial letter, and the zoning variance rejection?" Naomi hesitated. "I'd need to think about it, and talk to Evelyn." "Evelyn Hart?" Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "The investor who's been quietly backing women, owned businesses across 3 states?" Now it was Naomi's turn to be surprised. "I didn't know about other businesses." Daniel pulled out his card again. "Take your time. Think it over. But Mrs. Rivera, stories like yours matter. They can lead to real change." He wrote his cell number on the back of the card. "Call me any time." Naomi walked him to the door, her mind spinning with this new information about Evelyn. As Daniel started down the apartment building's outdoor walkway, movement caught her eye. A familiar dark sedan crept past on the street below, Calvin Drake's car, moving slowly enough for her to clearly see him behind the wheel. Daniel noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Naomi said quickly, but her hands gripped the doorframe a little tighter. "Thank you for stopping by." She watched until Daniel reached his car, then closed and locked her door. The smell of cinnamon still filled the apartment, but somehow it had lost its comforting warmth. She needed to call Evelyn. The morning light painted Main Street in soft autumn colors as Naomi arrived at the coffee shop. She found Evelyn already seated at their usual corner table, a notebook and 2 steaming mugs waiting. The older woman's calm presence had become a steady anchor in Naomi's increasingly busy life. "I brought those sample schedules you asked for," Naomi said, settling into her chair. She pulled out a well-worn folder. "I think we could do 3 pop-up events before Thanksgiving, maybe start with—" Evelyn's phone buzzed against the table, interrupting their planning. She glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "Excuse me for just a moment," Evelyn said, answering the call. "This is Evelyn Hart speaking." Naomi sipped her coffee, half listening as she arranged her papers. But something in Evelyn's tone made her look up. "No, I'm not interested in appearing on your morning show," Evelyn was saying firmly. "My investment choices are private matters. No comment about HeartMade's current market position either." Naomi's hand froze midway to her coffee cup. HeartMade? The massive home goods company? She'd grown up seeing their logo on everything from dish towels to furniture. Her own kitchen held several HeartMade mixing bowls, bought on clearance years ago. Evelyn ended the call with a quiet sigh. When she met Naomi's startled gaze, her eyes held a mixture of resignation and apology. "I suppose we need to talk," Evelyn said softly. "You're that Evelyn Hart?" Naomi's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am." Evelyn's shoulders straightened slightly, but her expression remained gentle. "I founded HeartMade 40 years ago in my garage, started with hand-sewn pot holders. Sold the company 5 years ago, though I keep a seat on the board." Naomi's mind raced through their previous interactions, remembering Evelyn's business advice, her quiet confidence, her understanding of supply chains and profit margins. It all made sense now. "But why didn't you tell me?" The question held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. "Because, the moment people learn about the money, everything changes." Evelyn's voice carried years of experience. "They stop seeing me and start seeing dollar signs." "I wanted our partnership to be about 2 women supporting each other, not about a billionaire's charity case." Naomi nodded slowly, understanding washing over her. "Like how you listened to my whole business plan before offering help." "Exactly." Evelyn smiled warmly. "I saw myself in you, Naomi. The same determination I had at your age, the same fire to build something meaningful." Their conversation was interrupted by the cafe's bell chiming. Daniel, the reporter, walked in clutching a newspaper. His face lit up when he spotted them. "Perfect timing," he said, approaching their table. "The story just hit the morning edition." He laid the paper down between them. The headline jumped off the page. "Small Town Dreams and Big Bank Barriers. How Systemic Bias Affects Local Business." Below was a photo of Naomi standing outside the bank, looking determined despite her obvious disappointment. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she read. The article was masterfully crafted, weaving her loan denial into a larger pattern of discriminatory lending practices. It mentioned Evelyn's intervention without revealing her full identity, focusing instead on the contrast between individual compassion and institutional barriers. "The online version is already gaining traction," Daniel said, pulling up his phone. "Several bigger outlets have picked it up, and the city council's getting flooded with calls about the zoning issue." As if on cue, Evelyn's phone buzzed again, this time with an email. She read it quickly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Speaking of the city council," she said, turning her phone so Naomi could see, "they've just approved a temporary variance for your location. Emergency session this morning, apparently." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really?" Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Would you like to go see your bakery?" 20 minutes later, they stood outside the small storefront on Main Street. The building wasn't much, just a narrow space between the bookstore and the flower shop, but to Naomi, it was beautiful. Her hands shook slightly as she fitted the key into the lock for the first time. The door swung open with a gentle creak. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the front windows, illuminating the bare wooden floor. The space was empty except for an old counter along one wall, but Naomi could see it all so clearly. The display cases that would showcase her breads, the small tables where people could sit and enjoy a warm slice, the kitchen where she would create her recipes. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty room. The morning sun painted golden rectangles across the floor, like God's own spotlight illuminating her dream. Naomi touched the aged counter, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers, worn by years of previous shopkeepers. "It's perfect," she whispered, not trusting her voice with more volume. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching with quiet joy as Naomi moved through the space. She didn't need to say anything, her presence was support enough. The sunlight streamed steadily through the windows, warming the wooden floors and filling the empty space with promise. The sun hadn't risen yet on Thanksgiving morning when Naomi unlocked the front door of Sunrise Loaves. Her breath made little clouds in the chilly air as she stepped inside, flicking on the lights. The empty display cases gleamed, waiting for the day's fresh bread. The scent of yesterday's test bakes still lingered. Cinnamon, yeast, and possibility. Alex was already there, tools spread across his workbench as he made final adjustments to the wooden shelving he'd crafted. Each piece showed careful attention to detail, from the smooth sanded edges to the subtle carved wheat stalks along the corners. He looked up with a warm smile. "Morning," he said, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Just finishing the last bracket on this top shelf. Want to make sure everything's perfect for your big day." Maya burst through the door, her backpack full of her handmade courage cards. "Mama, the streetlights still have their twinkly lights on. Can I put my cards everywhere?" Naomi hugged her daughter close. "Of course, sweet pea. Just make sure they're not in anyone's way." While Alex mounted the final shelf, Maya skipped around the shop, carefully placing her colorful cards. Some had Bible verses written in her careful third-grade handwriting, "With God all things are possible." Others featured her own encouraging messages, "You are braver than you think," and "Bread makes everything better." The morning flew by, in a blur of preparation. Naomi arranged still warm loaves on Alex's shelves, honey wheat, rustic sourdough, cinnamon swirl, and her signature olive rosemary. The cases filled with scones and muffins, each labeled with hand-lettered signs. The coffee maker burbled cheerfully, filling the space with its rich aroma. At 9:45, Naomi peeked through the front window. Her heart skipped. A line had already formed, stretching past the hardware store next door. Ruthie stood at the front, wearing her Sunday best, with little Jamie bouncing excitedly beside her. The church choir, bundled in scarves and mittens, assembled on the sidewalk. "Look at all those people!" Maya pressed her nose against the glass. Alex gave the last shelf a final check. "They're here for you, Naomi, for what you've created." Naomi smoothed her apron, touched the small cross necklace at her throat, and took a deep breath. Ready or not? At exactly 10:00, she unlocked the door. The choir burst into amazing grace as Ruthie stepped forward, tears already glistening in her eyes. "Welcome to Sunrise Loaves," Naomi said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The morning passed in a wonderful whirlwind. Naomi sliced samples, wrapped loaves, and shared stories with neighbors who'd known her since childhood. Maya flitted between customers, offering courage cards and brightening the room with her infectious smile. Alex stayed close by, quietly refilling coffee and adjusting displays when needed. From her spot near the back window, Evelyn watched it all, declining attention with gentle waves. She'd insisted this was Naomi's moment to shine. When a young mother came in counting careful change, Evelyn silently slipped the cashier enough to cover her purchase. Mid-morning, someone snapped a photo of Naomi handing a warm loaf to Mrs. Chen, who'd been first in line at the bank that day months ago. The image caught Naomi's radiant smile, the steam rising from the fresh bread, the sunlight streaming through the window. Within hours, it appeared on local news sites with the caption, "Denied yesterday, opened today." The choir sang carols between their regular hymns, their voices carrying down Main Street. Ruthie held court at a small table, sharing stories of Naomi's journey with anyone who'd listen. "That girl," she kept saying, dabbing her eyes. "That girl never lost faith." Even as the lunch rush faded, customers kept coming. Maya's courage card basket needed refilling twice. The coffee pot stayed busy, especially with the veterans who'd heard about their special discount. Each time the bell above the door chimed, Naomi felt a fresh surge of gratitude. By closing time, the shelves were nearly bare. The last customers lingered, sipping coffee and sharing stories in the warm space. Evelyn had slipped out earlier, leaving only a small note. "You've done it, dear heart." Finally, as the streetlights twinkled to life outside, Naomi walked the last guests to the door. She turned the sign to "Closed" and began her closing routine, wiping counters, counting receipts, straightening Maya's remaining courage cards. Maya helped stack the empty baskets, humming carols under her breath. "Can we do this again tomorrow, Mama?" "We sure can, sweet pea." Naomi gathered their coats and bags, taking one last look around her bakery, her very own bakery. The empty shelves didn't feel empty at all. They felt full of promise for tomorrow's bread. She locked the door, testing it twice as she always did. Maya slipped her small hand into Naomi's as they started their walk home. Above them, holiday lights draped between lampposts cast a gentle glow on the quiet street. Each step felt like walking on air. "Mama?" Maya asked as they passed the town square's Christmas tree. "Are you happy?" Naomi squeezed her daughter's hand, too full of joy for words for a moment. The lights twinkled above them like stars, and the evening air carried the lingering scent of fresh bread and possibility. The morning light filtered through the bakery's front windows, casting warm squares on the freshly swept floor. Naomi adjusted her apron and smiled at the small crowd of veterans gathered around the coffee station. The rich aroma of fresh roasted beans mingled with the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls just out of the oven. "Coffee's on the house for all our service members," she announced, watching their weathered faces light up. She gestured to a wall near the register where colorful cards hung on wooden pegs. "And this is our pay. Forward wall. Anyone can buy a loaf for someone in need. They just take a card and bring it to the counter." An older veteran in a faded navy cap stepped forward, his eyes crinkling. "Ma'am, this is mighty kind of you." He cradled his coffee cup like a treasure. "It's the least we can do," Naomi replied, thinking of her late husband's own military service. She'd painted his favorite Bible verse above the wall. "Share your food with the hungry." The bell above the door chimed as Alex entered, carrying 2 handcrafted wooden window boxes. Sawdust dusted his shoulders, and his tool belt jingled at his hip. "Morning, everyone," he called out, nodding to the veterans. "Thought these might brighten up the storefront, Naomi." "They're beautiful," she said, running her fingers along the smooth wood. Like everything Alex made, the boxes showed careful attention to detail, with delicate carvings of wheat stalks along the sides. Maya emerged from the kitchen with a fresh tray of cookies, her hands protected by oversized oven mitts. "Mom, can I put some flowers in the boxes when we hang them?" Before Naomi could answer, Ruthie swept in with Jamie in tow, his small hand clutched in hers. "Something smells heavenly in here," Ruthie declared, while Jamie pressed his nose against the display case, eyeing the cookies. "One cookie," Ruthie told him with a smile. "And then we need to let Miss Naomi work." Jamie pointed to a star-shaped sugar cookie decorated with blue sprinkles. "That one, please." His face beamed as Naomi handed it to him on a napkin. The morning rush picked up steadily. Naomi moved between the counter and kitchen, boxing up orders and pulling fresh loaves from the ovens. She noticed Evelyn sitting quietly in the corner, sipping tea and observing the flow of customers with satisfied eyes. Around noon, Chuck Langley made his entrance, dressed in an expensive suit despite the casual Saturday atmosphere. A young woman with a camera followed him, adjusting her lens. "Naomi," Chuck called out, his voice carrying across the busy shop. "I heard this was the place to get the finest bread in Maple Harbor." He made his way to the counter, smiling for the camera. "Welcome to Sunrise Loaves," Naomi said politely, noticing how Ruthie tensed slightly and drew Jamie closer to her side. "I'll take one of your premium gift baskets," Chuck announced, pointing to an elaborate display of artisan breads and local honey. The Chamber of Commerce is featuring local businesses in their newsletter. As Naomi wrapped the basket in cellophane, Chuck posed for several photos, making sure to stand next to the Pay It Forward wall. "Wonderful initiative," he said loudly. "This is exactly the kind of community spirit Maple Harbor needs." The photographer snapped a few more shots, then Chuck paid and swept out as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving a wake of whispers and glances among the customers. Alex, who had been installing the window boxes outside, came back and wiping his hands on a rag. "All set," he said. "They're ready for those flowers Maya wanted to plant." Naomi felt a flutter in her chest at his steadfast presence, so different from Chuck's showy visit. "Thank you. They really do make the place look more homey." Throughout the day, customers kept coming. Several bought extra loaves to hang on the Pay It Forward wall, and Naomi's heart warmed each time someone in need quietly claimed one. By late afternoon, the display cases were nearly empty. When the rush finally slowed, Evelyn approached the counter. "You've created something special here," she said softly. "Not just a bakery, a gathering place." Naomi looked around at her dream made real. Veterans chatting over coffee, children pressing coins into their hands for cookies, neighbors helping neighbors through simple loaves of bread. The sun was setting outside, painting the window boxes in shades of gold. Later that evening, after closing up shop, Naomi sat at her kitchen table counting the day's earnings. The steady stream of customers had brought in more than she dared hope. Maya sat nearby, working on new courage cards for the shop. "Mom," she said, looking up from her colored markers, "I think Sunrise Loaves is going to make it." Naomi stacked another pile of bills, adding numbers to her ledger. With these figures, she could pay her suppliers, set aside money for next month's rent, and still have enough to keep the Pay It Forward wall stocked. For the first time since opening, she felt the sweet relief of stability within reach. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows of Sunrise Loaves, casting a warm glow on the fresh-baked goods lining the shelves. Naomi hummed along with the Christmas music playing softly through the speakers as she arranged a new batch of cranberry-orange loaves. The sweet, citrusy scent mingled with the rich aroma of coffee and warm bread. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully as the bell above the door chimed. A group of holiday shoppers bustled in, their arms laden with bags from other Main Street stores. Their cheeks were pink from the cold December air. "Oh, it smells heavenly in here," one woman said, unwrapping her scarf. "I'll take 2 loaves of whatever's making that wonderful smell." Naomi smiled and reached for the cranberry-orange bread. "Just came out of the oven 15 minutes ago." The morning continued in a steady rhythm of customers coming and going. Naomi wrapped loaves in brown paper, tied them with twine, and tucked in Maya's hand-drawn courage cards. Each sale felt like a small victory, a step further from that day at the bank. The bell chimed again around noon. Naomi looked up from the register and felt her smile stiffen slightly. Calvin Drake stood in the doorway, dressed in his usual crisp suit and tie. "Quite the operation you've got here," he said, walking up to the counter. His smile seemed stretched too wide. "Who would have thought, right?" Naomi kept her voice steady and professional. "What can I get for you today, Mr. Drake?" "Oh, please, Calvin," he insisted, looking around the bakery with exaggerated interest. "The whole town's talking about your bread. Thought I should see what all the fuss is about." He leaned against the counter, studying the menu board. "Interesting setup you've got with that pay it forward wall. Very creative. Must be challenging to keep track of all those donations for tax purposes." "We have excellent bookkeeping," Naomi replied, thinking of Evelyn's patient tutorials. "Everything's documented." Of course. Calvin nodded, still wearing that too wide smile. "I'll take a sourdough, and, let's see, one of those cinnamon rolls." As Naomi wrapped his order, Calvin continued making small talk, asking about her suppliers, her hours, her cleaning service. Each question felt like a tiny pinprick. "You know, health codes for food service can be quite complex," he mentioned casually as she handed him his change. "Lots of little details to keep track of." "We're fully compliant," Naomi said firmly. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" No, just being friendly." Calvin picked up his bag. "Good luck with the holiday rush." After he left, Naomi had to take a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened the display case. She pushed away the nagging worry his visit had stirred up and focused on serving the afternoon customers. The rest of the day passed in a blur of flour-dusted aprons and cheerful transactions. Naomi loved watching people's faces light up when they tasted her samples or discovered the perfect loaf for their family dinner. This was why she dreamed of opening the bakery not just to sell bread, but to create a warm space where people felt welcomed and cared for. That evening, after closing up shop, Naomi and Maya sat at their small kitchen table. They each had a mug of hot cocoa topped with extra marshmallows, their special mother-daughter tradition. "Mom, can we put up our Christmas tree this weekend?" Maya asked, a chocolate mustache decorating her upper lip. Naomi reached over with a napkin to wipe her daughter's face. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetie. The bakery's closed on Sunday, we can make a whole day of it." "And can we make those special cookies? The ones with the jam in the middle? Thumbprint cookies?" Naomi smiled. "Of course we can." Maya stirred her cocoa thoughtfully. "I made new courage cards today. Miss Thompson helped me spell perseverance." "That's a big word," Naomi said proudly. "Do you know what it means?" "It means you keep going even when things are hard," Maya recited, "like you did with the bakery, Mom." Naomi felt her heart swell. She reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's right, baby. And look at us now." They finished their cocoa as Maya chatted about her day at school and her plans for making Christmas cards for her classmates. Naomi listened, grateful for these quiet moments with her daughter, for the simple pleasure of having a warm home and a thriving business. Outside their apartment window, the first snowflakes of the evening began to drift down. They were small and delicate at first, then grew larger and more numerous, coating the town in a gentle blanket of white. Christmas lights twinkled through the falling snow, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed. Main Street would be beautiful tomorrow morning, Naomi thought, all decorated for the holidays and freshly dusted with snow. She could already picture the festive window displays in the shops, the wreaths on the lampposts, and the bright red bows adorning the town square's gazebo. Meanwhile, in his home office across town, Calvin Drake sat at his desk, phone in hand. The room was dark, except for his desk lamp, casting shadows on the walls. He dialed a familiar number. "Jim? Calvin here. Sorry to bother you so late, but I wanted to discuss a concern about one of our newer businesses." He paused, listening. "Yes, that bakery on Main. I was in there today, and I noticed some questionable practices. Might be worth having the health department take a look." Another pause. "Yes, before the holiday rush gets any bigger. We wouldn't want anyone getting sick, would we?" The snow continued to fall outside, covering the sidewalks of Maple Harbor in pristine white. Christmas was coming, and the town was transforming into a picture-perfect holiday scene, unaware of the quiet machinations taking place in the shadows. The winter sun cast long shadows through Sunrise Loave's front windows as Naomi arranged her daily display of fresh-baked goods. The morning rush had just ended, leaving a peaceful lull in the bakery. A few regulars lingered over coffee at the small tables, and the air still held the comforting scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread. Maya's courage cards decorated the walls, their cheerful messages bringing smiles to customers' faces. The Pay It Forward wall had several paper slips pinned to it, showing how many neighbors had bought bread for those in need. Everything was exactly as it should be. The bell above the door chimed, and Naomi looked up with her usual warm smile. It faded slightly when she saw a woman in a gray pantsuit, holding a clipboard and wearing an official-looking badge. "Good morning," the woman said crisply. "I'm Sandra Martinez from the County Health Department. We've received some concerns about this establishment." Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course. How can I help you?" "I'll need to conduct an immediate inspection," Sandra replied, already moving behind the counter. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor as she walked. "Please continue your normal operations." Naomi nodded, watching as Sandra began examining every surface with methodical precision. The inspector's pen scratched against her paper as she made notes, her expression revealing nothing. The few customers in the shop tried not to stare, but Naomi could feel their concerned glances. Mrs. Chen, who came every morning for her sourdough, gave Naomi an encouraging smile as she gathered her things to leave. Sandra moved to the kitchen area, opening cabinets and checking temperatures. She paused at the shelf where Naomi stored her freshly baked loaves. "These need individual labels with complete ingredient lists and production dates," she said, marking something on her clipboard. "I can add those right away," Naomi offered. "The recipes and baking times are all documented in my—" "And these storage containers?" Sandra continued, cutting her off. "They need to be commercial grade with proper seals." She lifted one of the large plastic bins Naomi used for flour. "These aren't approved for commercial food storage." Naomi's hands twisted in her apron. "I just bought those last week from a restaurant supply store. They said—" "They're not properly certified," Sandra interrupted again. Her pen kept moving across the paper. "And your temperature log is incomplete." "I check it 3 times daily," Naomi protested, her voice growing tight. "I record everything." More customers had come in, standing awkwardly by the door as they watched the inspection unfold. Naomi could hear their whispers, see their concerned faces. Sandra straightened up and adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Rivera, I'm finding multiple violations of health code regulations. Without proper labeling and storage solutions, I have no choice but to issue a temporary closure notice." The words hit Naomi like a physical blow. "Please," she said quietly. "These are minor issues. I can fix them today." "The law is clear," Sandra replied, pulling out an official form. She began filling it out in neat handwriting. "You can't operate until these violations are addressed, and you pass a follow-up inspection." Naomi watched helplessly as Sandra wrote out the closure notice. The inspector's movements were precise and efficient as she pulled out a roll of bright yellow tape from her briefcase. "I need you to close immediately," Sandra said, walking to the front door. She pressed the tape across the glass, forming an X. Then she taped the official notice in the center, "Closed for health code review." The remaining customers gathered their things, giving Naomi sympathetic looks as they left. The bell chimed with each departure, its cheerful sound now seeming hollow. "You'll receive notification when you can schedule a follow-up inspection," Sandra said, gathering her things. "Don't remove the notice." She walked out, leaving Naomi alone in the suddenly quiet shop. The afternoon light began to fade as Naomi sat motionless at one of the small tables. Fresh loaves still lined the shelves, their warmth slowly fading. Maya's courage cards seemed to mock her from the walls. The Christmas lights she'd strung around the windows blinked silently in the growing darkness. She hadn't turned on the lights. didn't want to see her dream so clearly suspended. Instead, she sat with her head in her hands, shoulders slumped, as the shadows grew longer around her. The evening shadows stretched long across Naomi's small apartment complex as Evelyn's modest sedan pulled into the parking lot. She emerged, carrying 2 brown paper grocery bags, her breath visible in the cold December air. The sound of her sensible shoes echoed on the concrete stairs as she climbed to Naomi's second-floor unit. Inside her apartment, Naomi sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the closure notice from the health inspector. Maya was at a friend's house for dinner, giving Naomi space to process the day's events. When the knock came, she didn't need to check who it was. Evelyn's gentle pattern was familiar by now. "I brought soup," Evelyn said as Naomi opened the door. "And fresh vegetables. You need to eat something." The older woman's presence brought both comfort and a fresh wave of shame. Naomi stepped back to let her in, watching as Evelyn moved efficiently through the small kitchen, putting away groceries and setting a pot on the stove. Neither woman spoke for several minutes. Finally, Evelyn pulled out a chair and sat down, reaching into her purse. "There's something else you need to see," she said quietly, sliding a paper across the table. Naomi picked up what appeared to be a photocopy of a letter. Her eyes widened as she read. The letter, dated the day they'd met at the bank, characterized Evelyn's 10-0 check as a personal gift, a donation meant to curry favor with city officials through Naomi's business. "This is being passed around town," Evelyn explained, her voice carrying a rare edge of anger. "I found out this afternoon." Naomi's hands trembled as she set the paper down. "But we wrote up a partnership agreement. We had witnesses. This isn't what happened at all." "I know." Evelyn's eyes were kind, but worried. "I would never." Naomi's voice caught. She stood up abruptly, moving to the window. The Christmas lights from neighboring apartments blurred through unshed tears. "I would never use you like that. You know that, right?" "Of course I know that, dear. All I wanted was to make bread, to have my own little place where people could feel welcome." Naomi's voice shook. "Where Maya could be proud of her mama. Where maybe I could help others the way you helped me." Evelyn watched her for a long moment. The hurt in Naomi's voice made her pause, recognition dawning in her eyes. This wasn't just about a forged letter, or even the closed bakery. This was about something deeper, the wound of being seen as someone who would exploit kindness for gain. "Do you know what I saw that day in the bank?" Evelyn asked softly. "I saw a woman with dignity, with talent, with a dream that deserved support, not charity." She stood and moved to join Naomi at the window. "That's why I offered partnership, not a gift, because you earned it." Naomi wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But now everyone will think—" "Let them think what they want for now," Evelyn interrupted gently. "The truth has a way of rising, like good bread." The soup began to simmer on the stove, filling the apartment with the smell of chicken and vegetables. Evelyn guided Naomi back to the table and served 2 bowls. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the warm food providing comfort that words couldn't. "What do we do now?" Naomi finally asked. "First we eat, then we pray, then we fight, but we do it smart." Evelyn's voice was steady. "We have the original agreement. We have witnesses. We have the truth." But Naomi barely heard the reassurances. Her mind kept circling back to that forged letter, to the health inspector's visit, to the faces of her customers watching as she taped up the closure notice. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. Later that night, after Evelyn had gone and Maya was home asleep, Naomi lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. The Christmas lights from outside cast shifting patterns on the wall, but they brought no comfort tonight. Every creak of the old building made her wonder who else might be questioning her character, her worth, her right to dream at all. In the bank's parking lot across town, 2 figures met in the shadows cast by the street lamps. Calvin Drake stood with his hands in his coat pockets, while Chuck Langley's silhouette was distinctive against the fresh snow. Their breaths mingled in the cold air as they spoke in low voices, their conversation hidden by the quiet of the winter night. Morning sunlight filtered through Naomi's kitchen window, casting a gentle glow on the worn linoleum floor where she knelt. Her Bible lay open before her, its familiar pages offering comfort in the midst of chaos. Her fingers traced the well-worn verses of Psalm 27, seeking strength in ancient words that had guided countless others through dark valleys. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The emptiness of the apartment pressed around her, Maya having left for school just minutes before. The silence felt heavy with the weight of yesterday's revelations. Her phone sat silent on the counter, probably filling with concerned messages from customers wondering why Sunrise Loaves was closed. The thought of the forged letter made her stomach clench. How could someone take something as pure as Evelyn's help and twist it into something ugly? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Naomi knew that gentle pattern, Evelyn. She called out, "Come in," not moving from her spot on the floor. Evelyn entered quietly, carrying a covered pot that filled the apartment with the aroma of homemade chicken soup. She took in the scene, Naomi on her knees, the open Bible, the morning light catching the tears on her cheeks, and understood. Without a word, she set the pot on the stove and lowered herself to the floor beside Naomi, her movements careful but determined. "Psalm 27, Evelyn noted, glancing at the open page. "One of my favorites." Naomi nodded, running her finger along the verses. "I've been sitting here for an hour, reading it over and over, trying to find the courage to do what needs to be done." Evelyn settled more comfortably on the floor, her usually impeccable posture softening. "Would you read it aloud? Sometimes hearing the words helps." Naomi drew a deep breath and began reading, her voice growing stronger with each verse. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" As she read, Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the familiar words wash over her. The morning light grew warmer, filling the small kitchen with a golden glow. "Wait for the Lord," Naomi continued, her voice catching slightly. "Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." They sat in silence for a moment after the final verse, letting the words settle around them like dust motes in the sunlight. The soup on the stove simmered quietly, its homey smell filling the apartment. "I've been hiding," Naomi finally said, closing the Bible gently. "Hiding behind my pride, behind my fear of being seen as a charity case, behind my worry about what others might think." She looked directly at Evelyn. "But that's not what God calls us to do, is it?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, it's not. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stand in the light and speak truth. That forged letter," Naomi's hands clenched in her lap. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about you, about Ruthie and Jamie, about every person who might need help but won't ask because of what's happening here." She straightened her shoulders. "We need to tell the truth. All of it." Evelyn reached over and covered Naomi's clenched hands with her own. "Are you sure? Once we start down this path, there's no turning back." "I'm sure." Naomi's voice was steady now. "I've been praying for guidance, and this feels right. We need to bring everything into the light: the loan denial, the zoning issues, the health inspection, the letter, everything." "Then I'll stand with you," Evelyn said simply. "Every step of the way." Naomi reached for her phone. "I need to call Ruthie first. She needs to know what we're planning, and," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "she needs to decide if she's ready to tell her story too. That's not our choice to make for her." Evelyn nodded, rising slowly from the floor. She moved to the stove and began ladling soup into 2 bowls. "Call her. But first, eat something. We'll need our strength for what's ahead." Naomi accepted the bowl gratefully, its warmth seeping into her cold hands. She took a few spoonfuls, letting the simple, nurturing flavor restore her. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Ruthie's number. When Ruthie answered, Naomi's voice was clear and determined. "Ruthie, we need to talk. About Jamie, about Chuck, about everything. I think it's time for the truth to come out." The fellowship hall's wooden floors creaked under the weight of folding chairs and restless bodies. Early evening light slanted through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across concerned faces. The familiar scent of coffee and sugar cookie standard church refreshments couldn't mask the tension in the air. Naomi sat in the front row beside Evelyn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maya leaned against her shoulder, drawing patterns on a fresh courage card. The room hummed with whispered conversations and shuffling feet as more townspeople filed in, filling nearly every seat. Chuck Langley sat near the center aisle, his usual polished confidence dimmed. Calvin Drake had chosen a spot near the back, arms crossed, jaw set. Daniel, the reporter, sat quietly in a corner, notebook ready but pen still. Ruthie James stood at the podium, her church hat slightly askew, hands trembling as she adjusted the microphone. The deaconess who usually led with such authority now looked smaller, more vulnerable. But her eyes, when they met Naomi's, held steady determination. "I've served this church for 23 years," Ruthie began, her voice catching slightly. "And in all that time, I've never stood here to speak about myself. But sometimes silence does more harm than good." The room stilled. Even the children stopped fidgeting. 15 years ago, I worked as a housekeeper in the Langley mansion." Ruthie's fingers gripped the podium edges. "I was a young widow with a daughter to raise. The pay was good, the work honest, but there were expectations I hadn't counted on." A few rows back, Chuck shifted in his seat, his collar suddenly too tight. Mr. Langley was persistent. Ruthie's voice grew quieter, but in the hushed room, every word carried. "When you're alone in a big house, when your job depends on staying quiet, when you're told nobody would believe you anyway." She paused, steadying herself. "My daughter Emily was born 9 months later." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Several heads turned toward Chuck, who stared straight ahead, color draining from his face. "Emily grew up, fell in love, had Jamie." Ruthie's voice strengthened. "And now my grandson deserves to know his heritage. Not for money, not for scandal, but for truth. Because lies, even polite ones, poison a community." Evelyn stood then, moving to stand beside Ruthie. She opened a leather portfolio, removing several documents. "When I invested in Sunrise Loaves," Evelyn said clearly, "I did it legally, transparently, and with proper documentation." She held up the partnership agreement. "This is the real contract Naomi and I signed. It's a standard small business partnership, witnessed and notarized." She passed the papers to Daniel, who began distributing copies to the town council members present. "The gift letter, circulating around town," Evelyn continued, "is a forgery, and we know who created it." Daniel rose from his corner, clearing his throat. "I've spent the last week investigating loan practices at Maple Harbor Bank." He pulled out a manila folder. "I have evidence that Calvin Drake systematically altered application data for certain demographics." Calvin started to stand, but Daniel continued. "I have copies of Naomi's original application and the version that was actually processed. The numbers were changed. Income understated. Risk factors inflated." He projected images onto the church wall, 2 versions of the same application, differences highlighted in yellow. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "This wasn't just about one loan denial," Daniel explained. "This was about maintaining control over who gets to succeed in Maple Harbor." The whispers grew louder. Someone called out, "Shame!" Another voice demanded, "Calvin should resign." Through it all, Chuck Langley sat motionless, his face ashen. When Ruthie mentioned Jamie again, describing the moment his mother told him about his grandfather, Chuck pushed back his chair. The legs scraped against the floor, drawing all eyes to him. For a moment, he seemed about to speak. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. Instead, he turned and walked quickly toward the side door, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. The heavy door closed behind him with a dull thud, leaving the fellowship hall in stunned silence as the evening light faded outside. Mrs. Peterson from the quilting circle was the first to move, walking straight to Ruthie and wrapping her in a fierce hug. Others followed, church members, neighbors, even a few bank employees who looked sideways at Calvin as they passed. Naomi watched it all, feeling the shift in the room's energy from curiosity to compassion, from judgment to justice. Maya squeezed her hand and whispered, "Sometimes the truth feels like fresh bread, Mama. Warm and good." The early morning sun broke through lingering clouds as paperboys tossed rolled newspapers onto frost-covered porches across Maple Harbor. On the front page of the Harbor Chronicle, Daniel's headline blazed in bold type, "Small Town, Big Secrets, Bank Managers' Discrimination and Millionaires' Past Exposed." Naomi's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper at her kitchen table. Maya poured cereal while watching her mother's face. The article laid out everything: Calvin Drake's manipulation of loan applications, the forged gift letter, and Chuck Langley's decades-old secret. Daniel had woven together a story of power, prejudice, and the quiet courage of those who stood up against it. The phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "I'm reading it now," Naomi replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this really happening?" "Turn on Channel 6, Evelyn said. "They're about to announce Calvin's resignation." Naomi reached for the remote with shaking fingers. On screen, Calvin Drake stood at a podium outside the bank, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles hung under his eyes as he read from a prepared statement. "After careful consideration and discussions with the board, I am stepping down from my position as manager of Maple Harbor Bank, effective immediately." His voice cracked slightly. "I acknowledge my actions have caused harm to members of our community, and for that I am deeply sorry." Maya moved closer to her mother on the couch, wrapping her small arms around Naomi's waist. "Does this mean we can open the bakery again?" Before Naomi could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "City Council emergency meeting in 30 minutes. You should be there." The council chambers were packed when Naomi arrived. She squeezed into a seat between Evelyn and Ruthie, who gripped her hand tight. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, his face grave. In light of recent revelations, this council moves to immediately reinstate all permits and licenses for Sunrise Loaves Bakery. He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Furthermore, we extend our sincere apologies to Ms. Rivera for the unnecessary obstacles and discrimination she faced. This is not who we are as a community." Ruthie squeezed Naomi's hand as several council members nodded in agreement. The mayor wasn't finished. "Additionally, in partnership with First Harbor Bank's new leadership, we are proud to announce the creation of the Sunrise Fund, a dedicated microloan program designed to support small business owners from all backgrounds in our community." He looked directly at Naomi. "Your courage helped expose a problem, Ms. Rivera. Now your story will help create solutions." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as applause filled the chamber. Evelyn patted her back gently, while Ruthie dabbed at her own eyes with a tissue. As the meeting adjourned, Naomi noticed Chuck Langley hovering near the entrance. He looked different, somehow smaller, more human. His eyes met Ruthie's across the room. "Ruthie," he said quietly, approaching their group, "could we talk, privately?" Ruthie straightened her spine, years of dignity evident in her posture. "Yes," she said simply. "The church office in an hour?" Chuck nodded, relief visible on his face. "Thank you." Outside, snow had begun falling in thick, lazy flakes. Naomi stood on the steps of City Hall, watching white crystals dust the sidewalks. Her phone chimed with a message from Alex. "Need help getting the bakery ready to reopen?" A smile spread across her face as she typed back, "Yes, please." The walk to her bakery felt different now. People stopped to greet her, offering congratulations and support. Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop promised to bring by a welcome-back arrangement. The hardware store owner called out that he'd have fresh coffee waiting when she opened. Standing before her bakery's door, Naomi took a deep breath. The closed sign still hung in the window, but not for long. She slipped the key into the lock, listening to the familiar click. Inside, winter sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its beams. The display cases waited patiently to be filled again. Her mixer stood ready in the kitchen. Snow continued falling outside, transforming Main Street into a holiday postcard. Naomi touched the window, feeling the cold glass beneath her fingers. After everything, the denial, the struggle, the truth coming to light, she was back where she belonged, not just surviving, but ready to thrive. The bell above the door chimed as Alex arrived, bringing with him the scent of pine and winter air. "Ready to get started?" he asked, already rolling up his sleeves. Behind him, more snow drifted down, blanketing Maple Harbor in white, covering the old and making way for the new. The morning sun filtered through Ruthie's kitchen curtains, casting a gentle glow across her well-worn tablecloth. She sat straight-backed in her chair, one hand resting protectively on Jamie's shoulder as Chuck Langley settled into the seat across from them. The normally confident millionaire looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched under his expensive wool coat. Jamie, oblivious to the tension, happily munched on his morning toast with strawberry jam. Crumbs scattered across the front of his favorite Superman t-shirt. "Would you like some coffee?" Ruthie asked, her voice steady but cool. Chuck shook his head. "No, thank you." He cleared his throat, his manicured fingers fidgeting with his car keys. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me, Ruthie." "I'm doing this for Jamie," she replied simply. "Nothing else." Chuck's gaze shifted to the boy, and something softened in his expression. Jamie looked up then, offering a bright smile that was pure innocence. "Hi, Mr. Langley. Want some of my toast?" "No thank you, son," Chuck answered, his voice catching slightly on the last word. He took a deep breath and turned back to Ruthie. I've been a coward." "Yes, you have," Ruthie agreed. But there was no anger in her tone, just truth. "When you worked in my house, what happened between us?" Chuck started. Ruthie cut him off with a sharp look, glancing meaningfully at Jamie. "Some details aren't for little ears." Chuck nodded, understanding. "Jamie, would you mind showing me your toy cars? I hear you have quite a collection." Jamie's face lit up. "Yeah, I got tons." He looked at his grandmother. "Can I, Grandma?" Ruthie smiled softly. "Go ahead, baby. Just stay where I can see you." Jamie scrambled down from his chair and ran to the living room, which opened directly into the kitchen. The sound of plastic wheels rolling across hardwood filled the quiet space as he began lining up his treasures. "I was wrong," Chuck said quietly, watching Jamie. "Not just about what happened back then, but every day since. Every time I saw him in town. Every Christmas and birthday I sent anonymous gifts through my secretary. Every time I convinced myself that staying silent was better for everyone." "Better for you, you mean?" Ruthie corrected, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Chuck's shoulders slumped further. "Yes, better for me, better for my reputation, better for my position on all those boards and committees." He ran a hand across his face. "I told myself I was protecting him too, protecting him from scandal, from whispers. But I was just protecting myself." Ruthie watched Jamie playing, her eyes soft with love. "He's such a good boy. Smart, kind, always trying to help others. You've missed knowing him." "I have," Chuck agreed, his voice thick. I'd like to make it right, as much as I can." "How do you propose to do that?" Chuck pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "I've set up an education trust for Jamie. It will cover any college he wants to attend, plus graduate school if he chooses that path. There's also money set aside for private school now, if you're interested in that option." Ruthie didn't touch the envelope. "And what strings come with this money?" "None," Chuck said firmly. "It's already done. The paperwork is final. No press releases, no public announcements. Just a grandfather trying to do one right thing after too many wrong ones." "Look at me, Chuck," Ruthie commanded softly. When their eyes met, she continued, "I don't want your money if it comes without your heart. Jamie deserves better than that." Chuck's carefully maintained composure cracked. "I know he does. I want to know him, Ruthie, if you'll let me, not as the town's benefactor or some distant figure. As his grandfather." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "As your daughter's father." Ruthie was quiet for a long moment, studying the man across from her. Finally, she called out, "Jamie, honey, come here a minute." Jamie bounded over, clutching his favorite red race car. "Look, Mr. Langley, this one goes super fast." Chuck smiled, tears gathering in his eyes. That's wonderful, Jamie. But you know what? You don't have to call me Mr. Langley anymore. If it's okay with your grandmother, you can call me Grandpa Chuck. Jamie's eyes widened. Really? He looked at Ruthie. Is he really my grandpa? Ruthie pulled Jamie close, pressing a kiss to his temple. Yes, baby, he is. Cool, Jamie exclaimed. I never had a grandpa before. Do you like cookies? Grandma makes the best cookies. A tear slipped down Chuck's cheek. I love cookies. Maybe sometime soon we could bake some together? Yeah, Jamie bounced excitedly. Can we, Grandma? Can we make cookies with Grandpa Chuck? Ruthie hugged Jamie tighter, her own eyes growing misty. We'll see, baby. Why don't you go pick out which cars you want to show your grandfather before he has to leave? As Jamie raced back to his collection, Chuck spoke softly. Thank you, Ruthie. I know I don't deserve this chance. No, you don't, she agreed. But Jamie deserves to know his grandfather. Just remember, no cameras, no press releases, no using him for photo ops. If you want to be in his life, it has to be real. I understand, Chuck said. I promise. Jamie called from the living room. Grandpa Chuck, come see. Chuck stood, straightening his coat. May I? Ruthie nodded, watching as Chuck walked over to join Jamie on the floor. She wiped away a tear as her grandson eagerly explained the merits of each toy car to his newfound grandfather. A few minutes later, Chuck rose to leave. He paused at the kitchen table, looking at Ruthie with genuine remorse and gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply, then walked quietly to the door. Ruthie wrapped her arms around Jamie as he waved goodbye, her tears finally falling freely. Her grandson was getting the chance to know his grandfather, and somehow, against all odds, it felt like the beginning of healing. The winter morning painted Maple Harbor's Main Street in shades of silver and gold. Fresh snow blanketed the sidewalks, and holiday wreaths adorned every lamppost. Inside Sunrise Loaves, warmth radiated from the ovens as Naomi Rivera reached for the metal, closed sign hanging on the glass door. Her fingers hesitated for just a moment on the cool surface. She breathed in deeply, taking in the aroma of fresh-baked bread and cinnamon that filled her shop. 2 weeks had felt like forever. But now, on Christmas Eve morning, she was finally ready to welcome her community back. With a quiet prayer of gratitude, she flipped the sign to Open. The first customers were already waiting outside. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door, and old Mr. Peterson with his wooden cane. Their breath made little clouds in the chilly air as they smiled and waved through the window. Naomi unlocked the door, and the cheerful jingle of bells announced their entry. Welcome back, she said, her voice warm with emotion. We've missed you all so much. Not half as much as we've missed your bread, dear, Mrs. Chen replied, pulling Naomi into a quick hug that smelled of roses and winter greenery. Within minutes, the tiny shop was bustling. The line stretched out the door and around the corner, despite the cold. Inside, Evelyn worked efficiently behind the counter, her silver hair tucked neatly under a Sunrise Loaves cap as she rang up orders and made change. She moved with surprising skill for someone who normally worked in corporate boardrooms. Your sourdough is still warm, Evelyn called out to a young mother, juggling a baby and a shopping bag. Be careful with that bag. Maya darted between the tables, her red and green dress swishing as she handed out her special Christmas courage cards. She decorated each one with glitter and drawings of stars. This one says, "Joy comes in the morning," she explained to a teenager who looked like he could use some encouragement. Like Sunrise Loaves, get it? The pay it forward wall, which had been empty just an hour ago, began filling up with paper slips. Each represented a prepaid loaf for someone in need. Old receipts disappeared as new ones took their place, a constant cycle of giving and receiving that made Naomi's heart swell. Add 2 more to the wall, Mr. Peterson said, pressing some crumpled bills into Naomi's hand. One from me, one from my Martha up in heaven. She'd have loved this place. The morning rush brought familiar faces and new ones too. Teachers from Maya's school stopped in for coffee and cranberry scones. A group of nurses getting off the night shift filled their arms with still warm loaves. Even some of the bank employees, the ones who'd worked under Calvin, came by with sheepish smiles and genuine congratulations. Ruthie and Jamie arrived around mid-morning. Jamie wore a new winter coat, and his eyes sparkled as he examined the display case. "Can I have a cookie, Grandma, please?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Ruthie said, her face peaceful in a way Naomi hadn't seen before. She grabbed Naomi's hand and squeezed it. "God is good, isn't he?" "All the time," Naomi agreed, squeezing back. Near lunchtime, Alex stopped by with a thermos of hot chocolate for the staff. His eyes met Naomi's across the counter, and his smile held promises of future conversations and possibilities. But for now, he just helped Maya restock her courage card basket and fixed a wobbly table leg without being asked. The afternoon brought a steady stream of last-minute shoppers picking up bread and rolls for their Christmas dinners. Naomi's special holiday loaves, studded with dried fruits and nuts, twisted into festive shapes, sold out quickly, but she'd planned ahead, with more batches rising in the back. Between customers, she caught glimpses of the town through her front windows. Snow fell in lazy spirals. Children pressed their faces against the glass to watch her work. Christmas carols drifted in each time the door opened, thanks to the speakers mounted on the lampposts outside. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the shop's worn wooden floors, Naomi checked her watch. It was time. She pulled a fresh loaf from the cooling rack, her signature honey wheat bread, still warm enough to smell like comfort itself. "I'll watch the counter," Evelyn said, reading her mind. "Maya and I can handle things here." Naomi wrapped the loaf carefully in brown paper and tied it with twine. She slipped on her coat and stepped out into the gentle snowfall. The church was only 2 blocks away, its steeple rising above the other buildings like a beacon. The walk was peaceful, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. She passed teenagers building a snowman, families carrying wrapped presents, and neighbors calling out "Merry Christmas" to each other. This was her town, not perfect, but healing, growing, learning to be better. The church's side door opened easily. Naomi made her way to the small pantry where Sarah, the volunteer coordinator, was organizing donations. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the bread. "Still warm?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Of course," Naomi smiled. "We can't let anyone go hungry on Christmas Eve." The last golden rays of sunset painted long shadows across Sunrise Loave's wooden floors. The day's rush had finally settled, leaving behind the lingering scent of fresh bread and happiness. Naomi wiped down the counter one final time, her arms tired but her heart full. The bell above the door chimed softly as Alex Mercer stepped in, stamping snow from his boots. "Delivery for the hardest-working baker in Maple Harbor," he said, his easy smile warming the space. He held up 2 large bags of flour, muscles flexing beneath his worn work jacket. Naomi tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You didn't have to come by so late." "Saw your light on. Figured you might need help restocking after today's comeback." He set the bags down gently. "Besides, my truck was already loaded. Had some supplies left from Mrs. Bachter's and O.C. Johnson's kitchen remodel." The familiar comfort of his presence settled around her like a well-worn blanket. "Well, since you're here." She gestured toward the kitchen. "I was just about to make some hot cocoa. The real kind, with melted chocolate. Not that powdered stuff." "Wouldn't say no to that." Alex followed her behind the counter, keeping a respectful distance as she moved around her kitchen with practiced ease. The small back room filled with the rich aroma of melting chocolate as Naomi stirred the pot. She could hear Alex arranging the flour bags in the storage area, his movements careful and deliberate. When she poured the cocoa into 2 ceramic mugs, he had already pulled up 2 chairs near the warm oven. "Maya's cards are everywhere," Alex noted, nodding toward the wall where dozens of hand-drawn courage cards created a colorful collage. "People really love them." "They do." Naomi handed him a mug and settled into the chair beside him. She's already planning new designs for Valentine's Day." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their cocoa. Through the kitchen window, they could see snow starting to fall again, fat flakes drifting past the streetlights. "You know," Alex said finally, "what you did here, standing up to Calvin and Chuck, not backing down, it meant something to a lot of people." Naomi wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Honestly, most days I was terrified. But then I'd think about Maya watching me, and all those folks who needed a place like this." She gestured to the pay-it-forward wall where paper slips marked prepaid loaves for neighbors in need. "That's what makes it brave," Alex said quietly. "Doing it anyway, even when you're scared." "Speaking from experience?" She glanced at him, noting how the kitchen's warm light softened his features. "Maybe." He took another sip of cocoa. "In the service, we used to say, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing what's right, even when you are." Naomi nodded, understanding flowing between them. "Did you ever think you'd end up back here, in Maple Harbor?" "Honestly, no." Alex set his mug down carefully. "But sometimes the best things in life aren't what we planned. They're what we build day by day, choosing to stay even when it's hard." His words settled in Naomi's chest, next to the quiet warmth that had been growing there whenever he was near. Not a wild flame, but something steady and true, like bread rising in a warm kitchen. "You know what Maya said this morning?" Naomi smiled at the memory. "She said this place feels like hope, smells like cookies." Alex chuckled. "Smart kid." "She is." Naomi stood to peek through the window. The snow was coming down harder now, transforming Main Street into a peaceful wonderland. "Sometimes I think she understands more than I do." "Kids often do." Alex joined her at the window, their shoulders almost touching. "They see things simply, like how helping others isn't complicated. It's just what neighbors do." Naomi thought about Evelyn's quiet strength, Ruthie's courage, and even the way the town had rallied once the truth came out. "This whole season has been a lesson in accepting help, hasn't it? And giving it," Alex added softly. "You've created something special here, Naomi. A place where people can find more than just bread." She turned to look at him, really look at him. This steady man who had shown up with his tools and his quiet support, never asking for recognition or praise. "Thank you, Alex. For everything. Anytime." The word held weight, like a promise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the glow of the street lamps. Inside, they finished their cocoa in comfortable silence, two people content to share this moment of peace after the storm. When Alex finally stood to leave, Naomi wrapped up a loaf of sourdough, his favorite, she'd noticed, and pressed it into his hands. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Just the simple act of sharing bread with someone who had helped make her dream possible. The bell chimed again as he left, and Naomi watched through the window as his figure disappeared into the curtain of snow. Main Street lay quiet and white, transformed into something magical and new. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning, and with it, more chances to serve, to grow, to build something lasting. For now, though, she simply stood in her bakery, her own bakery, and let gratitude fill her heart like rising dough. The evening of December 20, Threard settled over Maple Harbor like a soft blanket, streetlights casting warm pools of gold onto the snowy sidewalks. Inside Sunrise Loaves, the ovens hummed steadily, and the smell of cinnamon and vanilla hung thick in the air. Naomi Rivera stood at her work table, her dark hair tucked beneath a flour-dusted bandana, hands moving with practiced grace as she shaped another batch of dinner rolls. "These orders just keep coming," she said, glancing at the growing stack of paper slips pinned to the kitchen board. "Not that I'm complaining." Evelyn Hart sat at the prep table, her elegant hands moving swiftly as she assembled bakery boxes. Despite her billions, she worked with the same careful attention she gave everything else. "People want comfort food for Christmas," she said. "And your bread brings comfort better than anything else in town." The kitchen radio played soft carols, and occasional bursts of laughter drifted in from late shoppers passing by outside. Maya had gone home hours ago with Ruthie, who'd insisted on hosting a sleepover so Naomi could handle the Christmas rush. "Did you ever imagine this?" Naomi asked, sliding another tray into the oven. "That day at the bank, when Calvin was." She shook her head, still amazed at how much had changed. Evelyn's eyes crinkled with amusement. "That you'd become the talk of the town? That we'd expose corruption and heal old wounds? That you'd have people lining up around the block?" She folded another box with precise corners. "No, I just saw a woman with fire in her eyes and good bread in her plan." "God's timing," Naomi said softly, reaching for more dough. "I was so angry that day, feeling so small, but he had bigger plans." "He usually does," Evelyn agreed. She set aside a finished box and reached for another. "Though, I admit, I didn't expect to end up in the newspaper." Naomi laughed, the sound warm and genuine. The mysterious billionaire and the single mom who took on the town's power structure? How could they resist? "At least they used a decent photo," Evelyn said dryly. "Though I still think the guardian angel of Main Street headline was a bit much." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of baking and box folding creating its own kind of peace. The clock ticked past 9, then 10, but neither woman seemed to notice. There were Christmas morning breakfast orders to fill, dinner rolls to package, and special requests to complete. "You know what I love most?" Naomi said, brushing flour from her apron. "When people come in who've been turned down themselves, the way their faces light up when they see the partnership applications on the counter." Evelyn nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The Sunrise Fund is going to change lives, though I suspect watching you succeed did more to shake things up than any amount of money could have." "We make quite a team," Naomi said, pulling out a tray of perfectly golden rolls. "The quiet billionaire and the loud bread." That made Evelyn laugh outright, a sound rarely heard in public. "Is that what we're calling it now? Better than the whisper that rattled Maple Harbor. I still can't believe that headline." "Poor Jamie," Evelyn said softly. "Though Ruthie says he's doing well with everything, Chuck's been keeping his promises." "Miracles come in all sizes," Naomi agreed, starting to package the cooled bread. "Speaking of which, did you see Alex's Christmas window display? The little wooden sunrise he carved for the sign?" "I did," Evelyn said, her tone knowing. "He's quite talented and patient." Naomi felt her cheeks warm. "We're taking things slow. After everything that's happened." "Good things take time," Evelyn said simply. "Like bread and healing." They worked through another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Maya's latest art project, the church's Christmas service plans, ideas for New Year specials. The pile of orders slowly transformed into neat boxes and bags, ready for tomorrow's pickup. Finally, near midnight, Naomi looked around at their work. "I think we did it," she said, amazement in her voice. "Every single order." "Was there ever any doubt?" Evelyn asked, standing and stretching. "Only about 100 times," Naomi admitted with a laugh. "Let me walk you to your car." They bundled up against the December night, Naomi locking the bakery door behind them. The street was quiet now, Christmas lights twinkling in shop windows. Fresh snow had fallen while they worked, unmarked, except for their footprints. The streetlights caught the falling flakes, turning them to gold as they drifted down. Both women paused for a moment, taking in the peace of it all. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. "Not just for tonight. For everything." Evelyn smiled, her breath visible in the cold air. "That's what partnerships are for." They walked the short distance to Evelyn's modest sedan. She still refused to drive anything flashy, their footsteps crunching in the new snow. The night wrapped around them like a gentle blessing, full of possibility and peace. The church bells of Maple Harbor rang out clear and bright in the crisp morning air, their melody carrying across the snow-dusted streets. Naomi Rivera stood at Sunrise Loave's front door, her breath visible in little clouds as she worked the key into the lock. The sky was still dark, with just a hint of dawn touching the horizon, but already a small line had formed on the sidewalk. She paused for a moment, taking in the scene. Christmas lights twinkled in the pre-dawn darkness, strung across the downtown storefronts. The air held that special stillness that came with fresh snow, broken only by the gentle murmur of waiting customers and the distant chime of bells. "Good morning, everyone," Naomi called out warmly as she pushed open the door. The bell above it jingled merrily, mixing with the church bell's fading echoes. "Come on in, where it's warm." Inside, the bakery glowed with golden light. Maya had stayed late the night before, helping decorate for Christmas Eve. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, and a small tree in the corner sparkled with white lights. The display cases, still empty, waited to be filled with the day's fresh bread. Naomi moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, checking the ovens she'd fired up hours earlier. The first batch of bread was nearly ready, filling the shop with that irresistible aroma of fresh-baked comfort. As she worked, she could hear the quiet conversation of customers finding seats, the clink of coffee cups, as her morning staff served complimentary hot drinks to those waiting. Right on time, Ruthie James arrived with little Jamie, his small hand clasped in hers. They stood near the counter, Jamie bouncing on his toes with excitement, his winter coat still dusted with snow. "Merry Christmas Eve, Miss Naomi," Jamie called out, waving enthusiastically. "Merry Christmas Eve, sweet boy," Naomi replied, her heart warming at his innocent joy. The timer chimed, and she pulled the first golden loaves from the oven. Without hesitation, she wrapped the very first loaf in brown paper, tying it with red and white string. The bread was still warm as she handed it across the counter to Ruthie and Jamie. "The first loaf of Christmas Eve," she said softly, meeting Ruthie's eyes. "It belongs to you." Ruthie's eyes glistened as she accepted the bread, pulling Jamie close against her side. They both knew how much had changed since that whispered truth in the church hall just weeks ago. "Thank you, honey," Ruthie whispered. "For everything." As Ruthie and Jamie found a table by the window, Naomi wrapped the second loaf. This one went into a box marked with the church pantry's address. She'd made this promise to herself when she first opened. The second loaf of every day would go to those who needed it most. The line of customers moved steadily forward as more fresh bread emerged from the ovens. Then a woman Naomi hadn't seen before stepped up to the counter. She wore a worn wool coat and carried herself with the careful dignity of someone trying hard to appear confident. "Just one loaf, please," she said quietly, then leaned forward and added in barely more than a whisper, "I was denied a loan last month, too. At Maple Harbor Bank." Naomi's hand stilled on the bread she was wrapping. She looked up, really seeing the woman's face, the hope there, and the worry too. Without a word, she reached under the counter and pulled out a folder, removing a simple form that she and Evelyn had carefully designed over cups of tea and long discussions about dignity and opportunity. "This is a partnership application," Naomi explained, sliding it across the counter along with the warm loaf of bread. "Not a loan, a partnership with clear terms and no interest, just like someone once offered me." The woman's hands trembled slightly as she took the paper, holding it as if it were made of gold. Her eyes scanned the simple, straightforward language, and when she looked up again there were tears in them. "Really?" she whispered. "Really," Naomi confirmed. "Bring it back when you're ready. We'll talk about your dreams over coffee." The woman clutched both the bread and the application to her chest, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. She stood there for a moment, hope radiating from her entire being, before nodding and making her way to an empty table to read through the papers more carefully. Naomi watched her go, remembering how it felt to sit across from Calvin Drake, to have her dreams dismissed so easily. But she also remembered Evelyn's quiet confidence, that first check, that first chance. Now she could offer the same to others. The church bells rang out again, marking the hour, as morning light began to paint the snowy street in shades of rose and gold. Through the window, Naomi could see more customers approaching, drawn by the warm light and the promise of fresh bread on Christmas Eve morning. She glanced around her bakery, at Ruthie and Jamie sharing their warm loaf, at the woman studying the partnership application with such care, at the box ready for the church pantry, at all the neighbors gathering in the growing light of dawn. This was what she'd dreamed of. Not just a business, but a place of welcome, of second chances, of daily bread and daily grace. The ovens hummed steadily behind her as Naomi reached for more dough, ready to keep baking, ready to keep serving, one loaf at a time. The winter evening settled over Maple Harbor like a soft blanket, streetlights casting warm circles on the freshly fallen snow. Inside Sunrise Loaves, Naomi wiped down the counter one last time as the final customers made their way out, clutching paper bags stamped with the bakery's cheerful Rising Sun logo. The bell above the door chimed its goodbye, and then silence filled the cozy space. "What a day," Naomi sighed, leaning against the counter. The shelves, once packed with festive treats and holiday breads, now stood nearly empty. Only a few lonely loaves remained, set aside for the church's Christmas morning service. Alex Mercer looked up from where he was sweeping, his steady hands guiding the broom in even strokes. "You did good today, Naomi." "Real good." His voice carried that quiet certainty she'd come to rely on over these past months. The radio on the windowsill played Silent Night softly, the melody drifting through the bakery like a gentle reminder of the season. Outside, snow had started falling again, big flakes catching the glow of the Christmas lights strung across Main Street. "I couldn't have done any of this without help," Naomi said, gesturing around the bakery. Her eyes traced the shelves Alex had built, the window boxes he'd installed, all the little fixes he'd handled without being asked. "Especially yours." Alex propped the broom against the wall and walked over to where she stood. "You did the hard part. I just hammered a few nails." "No." Naomi shook her head, meeting his eyes. "You believed in me when most people didn't. You showed up. That means something." The carol on the radio shifted to "O Holy Night," its sweet notes filling the quiet space between them. Alex held out his hand, a simple gesture that carried worlds of meaning. "Dance with me?" Naomi hesitated for just a moment, then placed her flour-dusted hand in his. Alex drew her gently into the open space between the tables, one hand settling respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers with careful tenderness. They swayed together in the dim light of the bakery, their shadows moving across the floor like a painting come to life. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla still hung in the air, mixing with the crisp winter breeze that snuck in under the door. "I love what you've done with this place," Alex said softly, looking around at the warmly lit space. "It's become exactly what you said it would be, not just a bakery, but a place where people feel welcome." Naomi smiled, remembering those first conversations when she'd shared her dream with him. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real, that we made it through everything that happened." "You made it through," Alex corrected gently. "I just got to watch from the sidelines and pitch in where I could." They turned slowly, their feet finding an easy rhythm together. The Christmas lights from outside cast colored shadows through the front windows, painting them in soft reds and greens. "You know," Naomi said, "Maya told me the other day that you remind her of her dad, not because you look like him, but because you fix things. She said that's what her father used to do too." Alex's steps faltered for just a moment, touched by the weight of that simple observation. "That's quite a compliment," he said quietly. The song was winding down now, its final notes hanging in the air like snowflakes. Neither of them moved to step apart just yet, comfortable in this peaceful moment they'd found. A giggle from the back doorway broke the spell. Maya stood there in her winter coat, grinning from ear to ear at the sight of them dancing. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she had her backpack slung over one shoulder, clearly just returned from her after-school art club. "Are you guys having a Christmas party without me?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Naomi and Alex stepped apart naturally, though Alex's hand lingered for a moment on Naomi's before letting go. "Just cleaning up, sweetheart," Naomi said, smoothing her apron. "Ready to head upstairs?" Maya nodded, but her smile didn't fade. "Can we have hot chocolate first? And maybe Mr. Alex could help us put up the last decorations on our tree." Alex glanced at Naomi, letting her take the lead. She recognized it for what it was, his careful way of respecting boundaries, of letting her set the pace. Before Naomi could answer, Maya was already heading for the stairs that led to their apartment above the bakery, her footsteps light and quick on the wooden steps. She paused at the top, looking back down at them with expectant eyes before disappearing through the door. The bell chimed one final time as Alex stepped out into the snowy evening, leaving Naomi alone in the warmth of her bakery. She watched through the frosted window as his figure disappeared into the gentle snowfall, a smile lingering on her face from their dance. The radio still played softly, Christmas carols filling the comfortable silence. As she turned back to finish closing, something caught her eye. A cream-colored envelope propped against the register. Her name was written across the front in Evelyn's elegant handwriting. Naomi hadn't even noticed when her mentor had slipped away earlier, too busy with the holiday rush. She picked up the envelope, running her fingers along its edges. The paper was thick and expensive, but somehow still humble, just like Evelyn herself. Naomi settled onto one of the stools at the counter, the same spot where she'd served countless customers their first taste of sunrise loaves. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, lingering traces of the day's work. Naomi carefully opened the envelope, not wanting to tear it. Inside was a single note card, also cream-colored, with a delicate watermark of a rising sun in the corner, the same design that now stamped her bakery bags. Her eyes filled as she read the simple message. Grace tastes like warm bread. Keep baking. E. Naomi pressed the note to her heart, tears spilling onto her cheeks. The words captured everything, the journey, the struggle, the victory, but most of all, the grace that had carried her through. She thought of that first day at the bank, when a stranger's kindness had changed everything. How Evelyn had seen past her pride and fears, offering not just money but partnership and friendship. The Christmas lights strung along the bakery windows cast soft colors across the empty tables, where earlier today neighbors had gathered over coffee and fresh bread. Where Ruthie and Jamie had shared breakfast, their faces glowing with new peace. Where a woman who'd been denied a loan had found hope in a simple partnership application. Standing up, Naomi walked to the back office where her worn Bible sat on the desk. She opened it to Psalm 27, the pages already well thumbed from that morning weeks ago when she and Evelyn had prayed together in her kitchen. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? She tucked Evelyn's note carefully between those pages, a reminder of answered prayers and the taste of grace served warm from the oven each morning. The bakery seemed to hold its breath in the quiet moment, while outside, snow continued to fall on Maple Harbor's peaceful streets. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning, new bread to bake, more stories to unfold. But for now, Naomi simply stood in her little bakery, grateful for the simple truth written in her friend's steady hand. Grace tastes like warm bread. Switching off the lights, she took one last look around the darkened shop. The window boxes Alex had built cast shadows in the streetlight glow. Maya's courage cards added splashes of color to the walls. And there, behind the counter, the spirit of Evelyn's wisdom and support seemed to linger like the scent of fresh-baked bread. Naomi gathered her coat and keys, ready to head upstairs to where Maya waited. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and there would be bread to bake, joy to share, and grace to give away one loaf at a time. But for now, she had this moment, this note, this reminder, that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in simple paper, carrying words that taste like grace. The evening had settled into that perfect winter stillness that comes after fresh snow. Naomi stood outside Sunrise Loaves, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. The street lamps cast warm circles of light on the pristine snow, making it sparkle like sugar crystals on her cinnamon rolls. Maya pressed her nose against the bakery window, drawing tiny hearts in the condensation. "Look, Mama," Maya said, pointing to where their Lagoa Simple Rising sunglowed through the glass. "It's like a nightlight for the whole street." Naomi smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. She remembered painting that logo herself, hands trembling with both hope and fear. Now it stood as a beacon of something bigger than just her dream. It had become a symbol of change for their little town. A group of carolers passed by, their arms full of bread bags stamped with that same sun. They waved cheerfully, their voices carrying silent night into the peaceful evening. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been coming in every morning for a fresh loaf, stopped to chat. "Your cranberry walnut bread is going to be the star of our Christmas breakfast," she said, patting the bag she carried. "Who would have thought we'd have a real bakery right here in Maple Harbor?" Her eyes crinkled warmly. "And such a special one at that." "Thank you," Naomi replied, feeling a familiar warmth spread through her chest. "It means so much to hear that." More neighbors walked by, each carrying their own pieces of tomorrow's celebrations. The Johnsons with their cinnamon rolls, the Martins with their sourdough, young Tommy Wheeler carefully balancing a box of cookies he'd bought with his saved allowance. Each face held a smile. Each greeting felt genuine, so different from the whispers and sideways glances of just weeks ago. Maya tugged at her sleeve. "Can we make snow angels before bed?" "Just one quick one," Naomi laughed. "It's getting late." As Maya found the perfect spot in the fresh snow, Naomi looked up at the night sky. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal a scatter of stars, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks not just for the bakery's success, but for the harder gifts too. "Thank you for the loan denial that led to Evelyn," she prayed. "For the whispers that brought truth to light. For the closure that taught me to trust. For Alex's steady hands building shelves, and Calvin's schemes that only made us stronger. For every trial that showed me what community really means." The sound of footsteps crunching through snow made her open her eyes. An elderly couple she didn't recognize was peering through her window at the Christmas orders ready tomorrow sign. "We drove from 2 towns over," the woman explained, catching Naomi's eye. "Our daughter read about your bakery in the paper, about everything that happened. She said we had to try the place where bread and justice both rise." She smiled shyly. "We'll be back in the morning. We'll have plenty fresh out of the oven," Naomi assured them, touched by how far her story had traveled. Maya had finished her snow angel and was now trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. The sight reminded Naomi of another night weeks ago, when she'd stood in this same spot with a closure notice in her hands and despair in her heart. How different everything felt, now not just the bakery, but the whole town. Where there had been division, she now saw healing. Where there had been secrets, truth had bloomed. Chuck was making amends with Ruthie and Jamie. Calvin's resignation had opened the door for fair lending practices. Even the bank's new Sunrise Fund was helping other dreamers take flight. "Mama," Maya called, "look what I made." She had drawn a heart in the snow and written "Love Wins" inside I-tone of her favorite phrases from her courage cards. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Naomi said, feeling the truth of those simple words deep in her bones. Love had won here, in all its forms. Love expressed through Evelyn's partnership, through Alex's quiet support, through a community finally choosing truth over comfort. The last of the evening's pedestrians were heading home now, their footsteps leaving temporary marks in the fresh snow. Tomorrow these sidewalks would fill again with people seeking warm bread and warmer connections. But for now, this peaceful moment felt like a gift all its own. "Ready to head up?" Naomi asked Maya, who nodded sleepily. She took one last look at her bakery, her dream made real through all the unexpected twists of grace. The rising sun logo glowed softly in the window, a reminder that each new day brought its own kind of light. Even the snow seemed to shine with promise in its gentle reflection. Maya slipped her small hand into Naomi's as they turned toward home. Together they stepped into the snowy night, leaving their own tracks in the fresh powder, mother and daughter walking toward tomorrow. The rising sun logo continued its quiet vigil behind them, a beacon of hope in the winter night, marking this place where something profound had changed in their little town, not just a business born, but a community transformed, one loaf of bread at a time. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi Rivera, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.